is the PowerPoint for Chapter 10 of our textbook, Victimization at School and Work. So first we're going to talk about victimization at school. So this is when a student is victimized on the school grounds, but doesn't only include being victimized at school. It is also counted if the child is victimized on the school bus or if they're attending a school function as well. So this includes a very wide variety of acts. We often think of school violence being very severe acts of violence, such as school shootings, but it also includes things that are much more common, such as bullying. So there's explanations that, can maybe explain minor offenses, such as bullying, but might not explain serious school violence, including school shootings. Okay, so school victimization and school violence is measured in several different ways. One of the surveys that we use is the School Survey on Crime and Safety. So this is a nationally representative survey, meaning from all over the country, of school principals, and it is collected every single year. So it asks principals about the extent of violence in their schools and preventions to sort of combat this violence. We also use the school crime supplement of the National Crime Victimization Survey. So when the NCVS is administered, if there's someone aged 12 to 18, they also ask them about their victimization experiences, specifically at school. So this is collected every 2 years. We also have the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey, and this asks students in grades 9 through 12 about their victimization experiences at school. And then the school-associated violent death surveillance system. So this counts homicides and suicides at school only. And this data set is built from media reports. So they'll look at newspapers, etc., to build their data set. Okay, so who is victimized? So the NCVS finds that children are more likely to be victimized at school compared to outside of school, but this totally depends as well on the type of victimization and whether the student is male or female. So in 2019, the NCVS found that there's almost 750,000, just a little bit over 750,000 victimizations at school. Again, this is a wide range of crime types, including theft and including violent crime as well. So male students are more likely to be victimized at school, while females are more likely to be victimized away from school. So about 8% of male students and 4% of female students report being threatened or physically injured by another student on school grounds. Okay, so there's two different sort of types of risk factors for victimization at school. Structural factors, which include, structure of the school and the area that the school is in, as well as individual factors. So for structural factors, one of the most studied risk factors is the school climate. So how does it feel being at school? Does it feel like a place of learning? Does it feel like, there's cohesion among the students and staff, that people want to help each other out? Or, does it feel like a prison? Sometimes the school climate can be very negative, a lot of fear of crime at school. It might seem that, it's not a place of learning, that the teachers are more, punitive rather than helping students out. So this is a factor that has been used to explain many types of school violence, including bullying, all the way up to school shootings. The location of the school is also very important, and urban schools tend to have more problem behaviors such as violence and theft than rural schools. Of course, it does also depend on the type of school violence, whereas some of the more minor forms of bullying might be more prevalent in a smaller rural school than in a big urban school. Social disorganization is a theory that's used to explain all types of crime, and it has been used to explain crime and problem behaviors in schools as well. So there's sort of three factors that make up social disorganization. First, mobilities. So these Schools that have a lot of kids transferring in and transferring out all the time are more likely to have problem behaviors. People aren't really forming sort of close bonds with each other if people are coming and going all the time. Concentrated disadvantage. So schools that have a lot of low socioeconomic status students are also more likely to have more problem behaviors. And then ethnic heterogeneity. So this means schools with a wide variety of different cultures, races, or ethnicities. So this could mean that there's sort of less cohesion among students if, there's cultural differences and students don't really understand each other. It could lead to victimization. So individual factors. Probably the most important individual factors is peers. So who you're hanging out with. If you're hanging out with kids that are bullies, then you might be bullied yourselves. If you're hanging out with kids that are engaging in theft, engaging in violence, then you're more likely to be victimized just because you're in close proximity of these kids. Social bonds is really important as well. So this includes bonds to pro-social teachers and peers, involvement in academics, so how well you're doing in school. School sports is a big one as well. Those kids that are involved in student government, in sports, in band, who are doing their homework, they're going to be less likely to be victimized just because they're going to be less likely to be around these, deviant peers. They're going to be more likely to hang out with pro-social peers who are into the same sort of things that they're into. They're more likely to have, teachers around, coaches around, and makes them less susceptible to victimization. And again, guardianship, student-teacher ratio. This is a big one. So if a teacher has, 40 kids in their class, there's going to be less guardianship because they're not going to be able to effectively manage all these kids. Teachers that have much smaller class sizes are more likely to, not pay attention, but have the time to get to know their kids a little bit better, what they're doing, keep a better eye on the classroom, which is then going to lead to less victimization. Okay, so one of the big consequences of school victimization is fear of going to school. If someone has been bullied, they may bring a weapon to school just because they're trying to protect themselves. There's lots of psychological and physical health problems with school victimization, just like any other type of victimization. Those that are victimized may then be involved in delinquency and substance use. If they have been bullied, they're more likely to become a bully themselves, sort of try to stick up for themselves. And those that have been bullied are more likely to use substances just as a coping mechanism if they're not able to cope pro-socially. Survivor's guilt is something that has a consequence of those involved in school shootings and other very tragic, violent events in schools. Obviously very, very difficult for the kids that have, attended a school that has had a school shooting. And survivor's guilt means that, they're not able to cope with what happened to the other students and sort of wondering why, why not me? Okay, so fear of victimization at school. So School Crime Supplement found about 5% of students were afraid of victimization at school in 2019. So we're not too sure yet how this has changed in 2022, whether this has increased due to the recent school shootings. We're not too sure yet. But then again, adolescents are more likely to be afraid of being victimized at school than away from school. So even though, there might be more likely to be, for violent victimization, more likely, especially for girls, to be victimized by somebody in their family rather than at school, kids tend to feel a little bit more safe at home than they do at school. So one of the big consequences of fear at school is simply not going to school. If you're afraid, you might pretend to be sick, you might skip school, and therefore this is going to affect your academic achievement and then, lead to being less likely to attend college and less likely to secure a high-paying job in the future. Okay, bullying. This is repeated intentional harm or discomfort on another where a power imbalance exists between perpetrator and victim. And this is a huge problem in schools, specifically elementary to high school, not as much in college. So there's two types of bullying. The first is direct bullying, so something that is done directly to the student, whether that be physical, which includes punching, kicking, hitting, etc., or verbal. So making fun of somebody is an example of verbal bullying. This could also be indirect bullying. And this is not something that is, done to the student, but involves isolation, excluding them from activities, and can be, just as harmful as verbal bullying. So risk factors for being a victim of bullying: physical and learning disabilities, obese children, kids with ADHD, autism, etc. And bullying affects psychological and physical health. So kids that are bullied are likely to, be unhappy, experience anxiety, depression. They're also more likely to experience physical ailments as well, like headaches and stomach aches. Cyberbullying is, a really hot topic right now because it is so prevalent. It's a newer form of bullying. It's done over text messages or social media, or, kids don't really use email, but generally text or social media, especially, TikTok. About 20% of kids report being cyberbullied. And this is a problem because they really can't get away from it. Whereas, physical bullying, they just have to worry about being bullied while they're at school. Cyberbullying can happen anytime. Most kids have phones nowadays. They have, social media, TikTok, these sorts of things, and they can be bullied at any time, during the evenings, weekends, summer vacation, etc. And there's a huge overlap between in-person bullying and cyberbullying. So those that experience physical bullying are also the ones that are likely to experience cyberbullying as well. Okay, so according to the School Crime Supplement, about 22% of kids aged 12 to 18 report being bullied at school. And it depends, on your sex. Males are more likely to be victim of physical bullying. So boys will often, get in a tussle, and it's usually fine afterwards. They fight it out a little bit. Well, females, they're a little bit more likely to be victim of indirect bullying. So lots of, whispering behind each other's backs, excluding them from activities, etc. Only about 46% of bullying victims report being bullied. They might think that it's going to make bullying worse. They don't want to be seen as like a tattletale. And according to the school survey of crime and safety, which is the principal survey that's done every year, only about 14% of principals report at least one bullying incident at their school. So principals tend to very, very, very underreport bullying. If we know that, 22% of kids are being bullied. And it could be that they don't know about it because it's not being reported, or it could be that, they're trying to make their school seem a little bit better. All right, so not only students are at risk for being victimized at school, but teachers, administrators, and staff are also at risk for both bullying and direct victimization, like violence and theft. So special ed teachers, they have the highest risk of violent victimization by their students, and secondary school teachers are more likely to be threatened. But interestingly enough, elementary school teachers are more likely to actually be physically attacked by their kids. Theft is the most common offense overall. And there's been, since the return from COVID lockdowns, there's been various TikTok challenges, such as Slap a Teacher Challenge, which makes, these teacher victimizations a little bit more prevalent. So after the return to COVID, it's been found that there has been more teacher victimization. Okay, so the Violence Against Educators and School Personnel Crisis During COVID study it was recently done. It came out in 2022, and it looked at sort of before and after COVID, how teacher victimization and, administrators and staff victimization has changed over time. This has led to a really high employee turnover at schools. So, teachers, administrators, along with many other factors, including being underpaid, are fed up with how teachers and parents are treating them. So 42% since the return to COVID of school administrators report being verbally assaulted by parents. So it's actually, been more common for administrators to be victimized by parents than it is by students. And there has been an increase in student aggression since coming back from COVID lockdowns. Okay, so there's a wide range of responses to school victimization, a very broad range of policies depending on, where you live and what school you go to. Most schools have, bullying report systems. Often on their website, they'll have a place that you can report bullying, which is a very common program adopted by schools. Some schools have zero tolerance policies. So this includes mandatory punishments for certain acts, it's usually physical bullying. So, if you're involved in physical bullying, they'll have mandatory acts that make it that you must, be suspended. This contributes to something called net widening. So it could be that all of a sudden with these zero tolerance, we see a huge increase in the number of, physical bullying incidents or violent incidents. This is because before it might sort of be dealt with, I wouldn't say swept under the rug, but it might be dealt with informally, maybe like mediation between the kids or whatever. But because of these zero tolerance policies, suddenly they have to, record this, violent bullying incident, which might, increase not necessarily the behaviors, but what is counted as a bullying incident. Gun-Free Schools Acts. This means that students can be expelled from school for 1 year if they bring a firearm to school. And every school that receives federal funding must adhere to the Gun-Free Schools Act. Okay, so a very common response to school victimization is something called target hardening. And we talked about this as a response to other types of victimization, such as theft victimization, but it's something that's very, very commonly done in school. This basically is increasing the safety measures of the school. It's making it more difficult to commit an act of either violence or theft in school. So these include metal detectors, security cameras, locking the entrances and exits, ID tags, locker searches, drug dogs. Many schools also have SROs, or school resource officers, which is a police officer at the school, or even armed security guards. And these things, have found to reduce serious violence in school, but it also might contribute to the negative school climate. So if you go to school and you have to, go through a metal detector, and you have cameras all the time, and maybe even, they have bulletproof backpacks now, you might not really want to go to school because you might not feel safe. You might, feel that there's more violent offenders around. And it tends to not feel like a school and feel more like a prison. So, this is effective for preventing serious school crime, which is good, but it might increase this sort of minor crime and bullying because the school climate is just, a negative place to be. Okay, bullying prevention programs, another thing that's very, very common in schools. And these have seen, they're pretty effective depending on the type of program. A study that was recently done found that these bullying prevention programs reduce bullying by up to 20%. They tend to work better the younger you start students. So in elementary school, they might not, do a lot in high schools, but if you start kids really, really young on anti-bullying, they tend to be more effective. The best programs use a multi-pronged approach. So students, teachers, and parents, involving everyone in these programs. The best ones are evidence-based and incorporate all the, the latest research. They teach pro-social skills, so how to deal with conflicts with other kids, how to maybe get along with kids that are different from you. Empathy, this is a very, very important concept in anti-bullying programs, is just, let kids know how these bullied kids feel and, the consequences that their bullying can have. Punitive measures are often ineffective for bullying. So if you just tell kids, okay, anyone who bullies is going to get expelled, it's not going to be very effective. Instead of, teaching kids how to get along with other kids and how these bullied kids might feel. Okay, so victimization also happens in colleges as well. And there's about 19.5 on-campus crimes per 100K students. College-age people are more likely to be victims if they do not attend college for most types of crimes. The one crime that is more likely for college students is sexual assault. And males are more likely to experience every crime type except sexual assault. So overall, campus crime has decreased since 2009, but the rate of forcible rape has increased. This does not necessarily mean that there have been more rapes since 2009. This is most likely due to the fact that more people are likely to report these rapes than they were before. Okay, so responses to campus victimization. We have the Clery Act of 1990, named after Jean Clery. So Jean was a student at Lehigh University in the late 80s, and she was raped and murdered in her dorm. So the doors to her dorm were left unlocked and propped open, and another student was able to enter her dorm while she was sleeping and raped and murdered her. So her parents sued the school because the university knew about the unlocked doors. They knew that kids propped their doors open, and they didn't really do anything about it. So this tragic event led to the Clery Act, which we still use today. So the Clery Act has 3 requirements. First, each school must publish a report by October 1st with the crime statistics and details about the crime. So this means that anyone can look up crime statistics at a particular school, so they can, make the best informed choices about what school they want their kids to go to. Universities are required to inform students about crimes and threats. Here at Texas Tech, every time there is a crime on campus, and even, I believe, campus adjacent, we get either an email or text message about, whether there is a burglary or whether there's a sexual assault. And certain rights are protected for the accused and victim in sexual assault cases as well. So the Clery Act might only give a partial explanation of crime. Some schools, are better than others at adhering to these requirements. They're better at reporting and publishing these crime statistics as well. Okay, so just an example of not really recent, about 10 years ago, case in Missoula at the University of Montana. So 2011, several women were drugged and raped by members of University of Montana's football team that were not taken seriously. These victims reported their assaults to the campus rape crisis center, which is exactly, what they were supposed to do. They filed police reports, but nothing happened. University of Montana really swept this under the rug. They did not take them seriously. The school said that they were not going to investigate because the rapes happened off campus, which is a Title IX violation. They still were supposed to investigate this. And an independent investigation of this whole thing found that the school did not take proper actions. Okay, so now we're going to talk about victimization at work. So this is if a person is working or is on duty and are victimized. It can also happen traveling for work. It doesn't have to necessarily be in a physical place, or maybe, a parking garage on the way to work. It includes a wide variety of different crimes, violent, sexual, theft victimization. And there is 4 types. So the first are criminal intent incidents. This is when the perpetrator has no legitimate relationship to the business at which the crime occurs. So this is usually robberies. So the perpetrator isn't necessarily targeting like a specific person there or a business for any reason other than that, they look like an easy target and they want to rob them, whether this be a bank, a convenience store, etc. Those are sort of the 2 most common businesses that are robbed. The next type is worker-on-worker incidents. So this is when the perpetrator is a current or former employee and the victim is also an employee at the same business. So this is actually a common, well, not common, but there's a, disproportionate amount of worker-on-worker incidents that happen at post offices. There's been several very high-profile cases of murders at post office Post offices, so one of these is the Edmond post office incident. I believe it was in the 80s in Oklahoma. And a post office worker came in and shot and killed 14 other employees and then shot himself. So these oftentimes are sort of these mass shooting incidents. And it was because he'd been disciplined by the supervisor the previous day. We hear this term called going postal when you just, kind of snap. And that term came about through all these incidents that disproportionately happened at post offices for whatever reason. Okay, so personal relationship incidents. This is when the perpetrator has a personal relationship with the victim. So the victim is targeted at work. So they're targeted as an individual. It's not necessarily that the business itself is target. So oftentimes this is when somebody wants to, murder someone and they know that they're going to be at work at a specific time and they go in and specifically target the victim, not so much the victim's workplace. So the last type is customer-client incidences. So this is when the victim is somebody that is giving services to the offender. So very commonly recently is assaults on food service employees. So assaults on people working at restaurants. I saw this one on YouTube the other day where someone, thought their soup wasn't hot enough and threw the soup back in the face of the person working at the restaurant. And an increase in assaults on flight attendants. This has been something, flying has not been very pleasant recently with since COVID. People are getting their flights canceled all the time. People are snapping, especially when we had to wear masks on planes. So this has, there's been a huge increase in assaults on flight attendants since COVID. All right, so even though it seems like there's, a lot of victimization that happens at work, you're still less likely to be victimized at work than outside of work. And employed people have lower victimization rates than unemployed people. So who is victimized? This is National Crime Victimization Survey data. Males are more likely to be violently victimized while they're at work, but males and females are equally likely to experience property victimization, so theft. Whites are at highest risk of workplace violence, and young adults and those who are single have the highest rates of victimization. Could be that it's, young adults and single people that are more likely to take jobs, like overnight jobs at, gas stations and convenience stores where they are more likely to be victimized. So occupations with the greatest risk. So one of the most risky occupations you can have is being a law enforcement officer. They experience 18% of workplace violent victimizations. Mental health workers as well, so people that work in mental health facilities have a high victimization rate as well. Retail sales, whether this be, gas stations, convenience stores, other stores that are, that there's an exchange of money between people. Teaching, we talked already about teacher victimization. Transportation services, so bus drivers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers actually have a high victimization rate, and they have a high rate of fatal workplace violence. So these people that have these jobs are the ones that are most likely to be victim of a workplace homicide. And also those who work in medicine, so doctors, nurses, etc. So again, some risk factors for workplace violence: places where there's an exchange of money, when there's something to steal. Places where a few people or a single person works at a time, so less guardianship, less people to intervene if something goes wrong. Working late at night or early in the morning, again, less supervision. Working in a high crime area, more motivated offenders. Working with the public. Having a workplace that is mobile, so this means Uber and taxi drivers. If you're delivering goods, passengers, or services. Security guards, guarding property or value. These are all risk factors for being victimized at work. So fatal workplace victimization. We keep track of this through the National Census of Fatal Workplace Injuries. And it did find that workplace homicides decreased from 2019 to 2020. Of course, we know why this is. Less people were working. We had a lockdown and people in their homes. We just simply had less people working during this time. About 16% of workplace homicide victims were women in 2020. And men are more likely to be murdered by somebody robbing the place, while women are more likely to be murdered by a relative or domestic partner, so specifically targeted when they're going to be at work. So another type of workplace victimization is sexual harassment. So this behavioral definition suggests that the perpetrator behaviors create psychological discomfort for the victim. So this does not necessarily mean like a forcible rape, but there is two main types. So the quid pro quo harassment. So this is when the victim is coerced. They're told that they will receive a promotion or a raise for agreeing to a sexual favor. And then hostile work environment harassment. So this is when the workplace environment is damaged. So it's hostile, intimidating, offensive. People might be, saying offensive things to the victim at work. There's a lot of sex-related conduct and discussion, and it just, creates a hostile place to work. So women are much more likely to be victim of sexual harassment at work. It doesn't mean males are not victim as well, but this is especially true for male-dominated fields. So this is very common in the trades when, males are more likely to work at the trades. Women that work there are likely to be victim of sexual harassment. And they're especially likely to receive sexual harassment if they display masculine qualities. Again, you see sexual harassment complaints went down in 2020. Again, it's because less people were at work. So sexual harassment is very common in the entertainment industry as well. So this is quid pro quo harassment, and it just, recently started coming to light within maybe the last 5 years or so. People started actually taking this seriously. Many actresses accuse Harvey Weinstein, who is a very powerful man in Hollywood, of sexual harassment and rape. Many, many, many women. These are just some of the actresses that have accused Harvey Weinstein. Okay, so lastly, some consequences and responses for workplace victimization. A common consequence is just not being able to go to work, taking time off if you're injured, being afraid to work, quitting your job if you've been victimized at work. And prevention strategies, we use crime prevention through environmental design. This means designing workplaces so that crime is less likely to happen, so increasing the supervision, making things less secure, making things less attractive. So an example of this is sometimes if you go to a gas station, they'll have a sign on the door that says less than $20 in the till after dark or something along those lines. This is, a prevention strategy, so it's, deters would-be robbers, because they think, okay, well, it's not worth it to, rob a convenience store for $20. Organizational administrative control, so providing training. This is specific for sexual harassment training. Many jobs provide it. If you work at tech, you have to go through a whole course in order to prevent sexual harassment. And then behavioral strategies. So learning to use nonviolent responses might help prevent victimization. Supervisors can also screen potential workers better.